what's been most challenging, at least for me on an individual basis, is again that this is the quintessential universal story.
How do you make any day special when one day simply now feels like the next?
They were telling me to be careful, to stay safe, and I did not think that I would be the one saying that to them just a few months later. At first, it seemed like a local story that was limited to Wuhan, to Hubei province, but a lot of the more experienced reporters here in China had the experience of SARS in their minds. It was a local story, but it clearly had rung some alarm bells with some people.
The first priority before any screening at airports or anything like that will be to continue the investigation into this disease that still is quite mysterious.
I was here for that first week where the story really broke. Between that Sunday, the January 18th, and basically the end of the month, I was on France 24 every day until I left on holiday for Chinese New Year. And then I came back a week later to a place that was completely changed. Beijing was a ghost city.
It felt like a distant story. It felt perhaps like something that wouldn't necessarily, cross over borders and come into parts of the world much closer to home.
I did get a sense that for the people I was talking to in Europe or the US or Canada who were seeing this unfold from far away, from afar, in January and February, there was definitely a sense on their part that this was a terrible thing happening far away or happening almost on a different planet, and not realizing that the world is so interconnected now that it could be coming towards them, and it was coming towards them.
There was a lockdown in a huge area up north. Just walking down the street in Rome, I could hear people talking about it. Basically everyone, whether you were outside the pharmacy or waiting to pick up some bread, that's all people were talking about. And there was clearly an element of concern in the air. People were wondering, well, if it's already affecting people up north, perhaps it's only a matter of time before it comes down south.
We must focus on containment while doing everything we can to prepare for a potential pandemic.
They're really amping the situation up and putting in these very radical measures. And I think it's in large part to do with the increase in the number of infections that we've seen in the last 24 hours, more than 1,000.
I think a major turning point for us at France 24, being based in France, obviously, is when the numbers started growing at an alarming rate in a neighboring country, namely Italy. People being hospitalized by the tens, the hundreds, and there was this clear sense because of the porous borders between France and Italy that this would inevitably come our way, which it did.
As of Tuesday at noon, and for the next 15 days, our movement will have to be severely limited. Anyone who does not abide by these guidelines will be punished.
This situation obviously has triggered a major paradigm shift for the newsroom, that of, for instance, having a vast majority of our staff working remotely. We try to keep staff presence in the newsroom to a minimum, keep it as skeletal as possible, and that has meant major adjustments in a very brutal and sudden way.
We try to maintain the so-called security distance between us and the interviewee. That's 2 meters. We try to wash the cameras regularly, avoid using hand mics. So it has changed the way we work. We try to reduce the time outside. For instance, I live in the center of Paris. I try, when it's possible, to do reports in the nearby areas and then return home where I edit myself, write the script, voice it, and send the reports to the newsroom. I haven't been back to the newsroom since lockdown was ordered by authorities. Of course, I'm in close contact with my colleagues, with my bosses, sending my reports.
What it's led to is a reliance, of course, on the internet. And I think that's across the board for anyone, even not a journalist, but even more so for us, because we need to be able to get the news. We need to be able to follow press conferences. We need to be able to find out what's happening on the ground.
The days, weeks, and months ahead will be a test of our resolve, a test of our trust in science, and a test of solidarity. Crises like this tend to bring out the best and worst in humanity.
The extent of the work has been intense, not just because of the amount of work, but also the subject matter, covering such immense death tolls and the struggles of the healthcare workers trying to deal with this, trying to give their all, or even the supermarket worker who's there trying to get the food to people who need it the most, but of course putting themselves at a certain amount of risk. I think all of that has brought it back home, how this has impacted everybody in every life.
What's been most challenging, at least for me on an individual basis, is again that this is the quintessential universal story. Every single human being out there all around the planet, including those right next to me here in my own house, but also colleagues at work, are being impacted by COVID-19, at times indirectly, but at times on a very personal level.
Once you're covering the story, it becomes your focus, at least it has for me. Just focusing on the story, making sure you get your figures, your facts, your information right, and getting it out as a concise way as possible. You don't really have a moment to think. And then finally, when you do, that's when the reality of everything hits home, as it is, I think, for anybody who is at home right now and dealing with all this information. It's not been easy, but you try to deal with it. You try to focus on the work that you do. You put yourself together and you get the information out.
These are very trying times. People unfortunately are dying from this disease. It's important to be transparent in terms of what the situation is out there, especially for healthcare workers. But at the same time, it's true that you don't want to add to the panic. And I think that the way to do so is by, again, being as accurate as possible and not sort of trying to play the guessing game of trying to tell folks what's going to be happening next week or a month from now, when literally no one has any idea, including those in governments. The way we will emerge out of this and what we will make of this and what we will make out of this depends on every single individual. There'll be no obvious way to, turn the page. It's going to be what we decide to do, collectively, but also individually as we come out of it. So in terms of how that's done, well, again, that's up to every single one of us to, pitch in and figure that one out.